Here we see Dean on the right-hand side of the screen looking at himself in a mirror. The focus in this lesson is your perspective as an observer who is watching what is about to happen. Let's start with this picture of a mannequin. You are now going to do a visual role play. Your task is to give attention to two categories of change that might be said to have occurred in the presence of the mannequin. First, consider those changes on both sides of the mirror when the mannequin appeared. Next, consider how you have been changed by the presence of the mannequin. Note that just as you could not observe changes on the right-hand side of the mirror, someone looking at you could not observe the changes inside you in response to the mannequin. As the lesson continues, you are asked to continue with your focus on these various categories of change. If you consider your personal changes in response to the animation, it is likely that the words you might use to describe these changes, or the feelings you might have, will have changed compared to how you responded to the previous static image. Presumably, you would agree that Dean could also have changed differently in the presence of the animation compared to the static image. But these changes could never be observed by others, only him. In terms of the kinds of changes that might be observed on the left-hand side of the mirror, we can assume that, with the appropriate instruments, they could be identified in some way. As for the actual changes in you, the observer, you might have found yourself inclined to use a variety of expressions. For example, you might have spontaneously noticed yourself using the words, "The mannequin fainted." You also might have had some associated feelings that belong to the general category called watching someone faint. Whatever the changes localized in you, it is entirely possible that you also spontaneously assumed something similar would have happened on both sides of the mirror. If so, then this is where things become very interesting indeed. We will come back to this in a moment. Before we do that, take a look at the same animation in a different context. Perhaps the term fainting is again preeminent in the descriptive label you would ascribe to the personal changes associated with your thoughts or perception. However, given the social situation in the animation, it would not be unreasonable to assume that these changes were embellished with additional story-like terms arising from the presence of the additional characters in the animations. Let's go back now to the point that was made, when it was said that things became very interesting in relation to assumptions made about changes happening on both sides of the mirror. The best way to approach this is to take stock of what just happened. You found yourself becoming aware of categories of words or phrases arising spontaneously in the presence of animations. At the same time, you know that an animation is simply a series of pictures that create the illusion of movement. Thus, the ascription of psychological terms by you to moving dots on a computer screen is truly a powerful demonstration of how your private world is influenced by your interaction with the environment. What's more, this exercise successfully drew your attention to private events that only you can see. This point is a defining feature of Skinner's radical behaviorism. He wrote extensively about how the private events of an observer were important in a comprehensive analysis of behavior. The current lesson also drew attention to the way in which your private events included conclusions or assumptions about what could have been happening on the right-hand side of the mirror. Had Dean been in the room beside you, you might still have made these assumptions. And you did this without any evidence to support your assumptions. In truth, though, all you observed were your own changes. This conclusion is of major importance. But to help solidify its importance, take a look at how this analysis plays out with some additional animations. As you watch, remember, the objective is to watch your own changes in response to the animations. When these changes occur, I want you again to watch how these changes impact your interpretation of what could be occurring on the right-hand side of the mirror. I bet you had difficulties holding back from responding to the animations as if you were watching a real person. And I bet you found yourself again assuming that Dean would have changed in the way that you changed when you watched the animations. But, and it's a big but, Dean is not there. He is not a person. Remember, all you observed were your own changes. And these changes included private events that involved the use of psychological terms to characterize what you were observing. In other words, your observations and your private events are somehow related. In the context of simple animations, this might not seem relatively important. However, something similar happens when you interact with real people, but you might not see yourself doing it. That can be problematic, especially in situations where you are asked to help someone develop changes in their own behavior. To help someone master changes in behavior, you first need to be able to specify precisely what they are currently doing. To understand why this point is important, take any of the words that crept into your head when you watched the various animations of the guy in shorts. Now, imagine you have access to an animator whose job it is to recreate an animation based on the word or words that popped into your head. Could the animator recreate the animation from these words alone? Certainly not. Additional information would be needed in order to ensure a perfect match between the original animation and the one to be created. Similar issues arise in the choreography of a dance. A choreographer must somehow guide a dancer, using notation that permits replication of a dance. This image is an example of what is called dance notation. Dance notation is similar to musical notation, and it allows a well-trained dancer and a choreographer to work together to reproduce a dance. If they are doing a good job, the audience, observing the dancer, will have the feelings and thoughts that the collaboration between the dancer and the choreographer had intended to create. The same applies to the relationship between every director and every actor in every movie you ever watched. You have the feelings you have when watching a movie because of their collaboration and their focus on delivering actual behaviors appropriate to a particular choreography. Their collaboration would come unstuck if they only used words drawn from a dictionary of poorly defined psychological terms. This is because they each would have different views on the choreography appropriate for any of the terms one of them might use. For example, in one of the animations it is likely that you might have used the phrase having a temper tantrum. Because there are so many ways to act out the behaviors associated with this phrase, the animator would have no idea what you would want to be drawn. In behavior analysis, we give similar attention to the precision needed to sidestep the vagueness that arises from most psychological terms when talking about behavior. We use a different kind of notation for communicating details of a choreography, one that makes reference to what are called the dimensions of behavior. These could include details on the exact specification of the topography of a movement, or terms related to frequency, duration, and latency of behavior. To conclude, in situations where the choreography of a behavior is being changed, the behavior analyst dispenses with the vagueness of most psychological terms, and instead engages with the behavior using the precision required to both guide and monitor the changes in choreography that meet the goals of an intervention. During this process, it is important for the professional not to be sidetracked by their private events, or by the imagined private events associated with the behavior.